Okay, y'all. We over here clowning. Okay, we got Ghalysa stretching. We got Dhuranique rocking Harvard like she went there. Clearly,
Anyway.
we having the time. But we here. Welcome back to what is this? Season 3, episode 2. We in it. Yeah, I feel like we real podcasters now. Like, some people come on the scene and then they leave. I feel like, although, we be inconsistent sometimes because life be life in.
We was gone for a little bit, but we back.
But we in season 3.
We are in season 3.
Like, we are freshman, sophomore, junior. We're juniors in the game.
Yes.
Okay? Like, we getting there. But yeah, as we told you guys last week, we will be diving into life in the valley, as this season is called, and just sharing a lot of how I've been navigating the past years-ish of life. It has been a time. It's so bad. It's bad when y'all just or when we bring it up and just start cackling at how bad it's been. Like, we just laugh. It has been a whole comedy. If y'all could have watched our lives as a reality show, it's been a situation. But we're making it. We're not out, but we
navigating through it.
I wonder if this would be called mastering the valley.
Mastering the valley.
I feel like
Such a therapist.
That was a therapist.
Yeah, when you first start out, you're like, I wouldn't know about this. I don't want to be here. And for me, a lot of the process was fighting this place in the beginning. And I was like, maybe this is just what life is for right now. And I got to master it. I got to figure out, people, when cavemen be out in the wilderness, they got to just figure out how to do it. Or the people on Survivor, when they start. And when they start and they're like, I got to make a fire. I don't know how to do this. And by the day, 39, they just out swimming, fishing, and doing all the things. Yeah. Wrapped up in their little bark and branches and stuff. They do it. So yeah, anyway, it has been quite a journey. So we laid the foundation last time of what is a valley? What does it comprise of? What does it look like?
Yeah.
And so we figured that it is time, finally, as we've been beating around the bush, to get into some of the meat and potatoes of
what does that look like?
Where y'all been at? What's been going on? Because clearly we in the struggle. So what kind of struggle are we in? So I guess that's a very therapist question. Because, we like to do that. That's our specialty. Oftentimes we talk about when we're experiencing something, even concerning a diagnosis, right? We want to know what are the symptoms? What are the indicators of whatever the thing is that we're talking about? So I guess first thing that we can kind of dive into is in the beginning of this valley experience, what are the things that we noticed about ourselves? What are the emotions, the reactions? How did our interactions with people change, with God change, with ourselves change?
Yeah.
All of that. What was that like for y'all?
I'll just go. Okay,
You look like you ready, prime and ready.
I took the deep breath in so I could just prepare myself.
A deep breath is good. It's coping skills.
Breathing is good.
Yes.
It's coping skills.
I tell my clients
We like to breathe.
So breathe. Honestly, I was stressed, y'all. I was stressed because if we're going back to, so our last episode dropped somewhere around September, October.
Yeah, I think it's September.
There.
Yeah.
And so oh my gosh. I went home, took a little break, and I got stuck. I was stressed. I was so stressed. I felt like I was just behind when I actually got back to the States. Yeah. I was 3 weeks behind.
Can I put in a pin?
Yeah.
For y'all who are unfamiliar, if you're jumping in with us in season 3, home for Ghalysa and Dhuranique is the Bahamas.
Yes.
And so when she says I went home, she went out of the country.
I was out of the country, yes. I got into some visa issues. I guess I exposed myself. But
it's the story in the process of an international student.
So I had to renew my visa, and it nothing seemed like it was working with my timing. It was not in my timing. I ended up being home for 3 weeks, and I was just I have client hours that I need to get. I felt like I was behind in school, and so when I got back, I was just all go mode. I'm don't talk to me. I have things to do. It was intense. That semester, just coming back in the fall, I just was yo.
All gas, no brakes.
All gas, no brakes. I would just be in class, tears streaming, and I just writing.
It's really not funny.
Like, I was that stressed because I felt I was behind. I just, like, yeah, it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad.
I think for me, I notice the signs that I notice would be like my engagement with life. I tend to become more avoidant when things get stressful. And I notice with me, like, even with food, I love food. And so I know when something's starting to be off with me too, when I'm not eating regularly or I'm eating more of a certain kind of food or whatever it might be. That's one of my first trigger points. And then I begin to notice more whenever I notice, like, in my interactions, I'm more anxious than I am present. I'm more in my head. I'm feeling more overwhelmed than I am present. I notice it in how I connect in my relationship with God. It feels more of like desperate, and it feels more like alone and me trying to find God rather than feeling like a joining kind of situation. I feel less present in my work. I just feel overall, you know what it is? It's just a huge level of like disconnection.
Yeah.
I'm on autopilot. And I'm just kind of going through the motions of everything, and I'm not finding actual fulfillment, joy, connection at any point. And it was bad. It's bad.
Yeah. For me, I'm trying to think back. You know when you go through so much rough that you forget the first half of the rough? I think a lot of mine has been noticing the things that are off with me in myself. I naturally am an internal processor, and I am in my mind a lot. But when my emotions started to go off and I was like, I've never felt this before. Like, naturally, I'm not an anxious person. But in all of it, I started to really, like, I remember one day I was walking around, like, doing regular stuff. And I was like, Daneille, why do you feel like this? And I was like, your heart is racing. Your mind feels like it's racing. Everything just feels foggy. And I was like, what in the world? And I felt like the walls of life were closing in on me. And I had to, like, talk to myself like we talk to clients. I was like, Daneille, 1, yeah. 2, yeah. 3, yeah. You're anxious. And I was like, well, where's anxiety coming from? And just feeling like I wanted everything to stop. I remember at the height of my overwhelm, everything irritated me. People who I care for would call me and it irritated me. Seeing their name on my phone, I was like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to see anybody except the people who I have to see. It was just a lot. And I remember in between, like, having to do responsibilities. So if it's teaching or supervising, whatever, I would, like, go home and just, like, need to take a 30-minute hour nap. Or if I wasn't napping, I just need to, like, lay down and cover my head. I just needed the world to stop for a second. And that's when I was like, wow, you're really not, what'd you say?
She's singing Stop the World and Let Me Off.
That's a song by is it Ronnie Butler?
Covered by Ronnie Butler.
Right. He's a Bahamian singer.
One of my personal favorites, actually.
He was song
Stop the World and Let Me Off.
Y'all remember all the lyrics?
Stop the world and let me off.
There's like more to it though.
Tired of going
round and round. And play the game of love and loss. Stop the world and let me off. Dun, dun, dun. So sorry, as you were saying that, like, I was like,
you saying you need things to stop? I said, like, stop the world
and let me off now. No, I don't want to do this no more.
No, that you know, it's kind of accurate. Yeah, it was just like I get into very much a place of like less emotion externally and more just like hyper focused into whatever I have to do. So I'm focused on being a therapist. I'm focused on being a teacher. I'm focused on being a supervisor. I don't have much space for anything else. I don't want to be called. I don't want to be spoken to. My capacity is limited and I've hit it even within myself. And it almost to the point of like sitting with myself, while necessary, feels daunting because I know the well that I will find if I sit with myself.
Yes.
Right? So like I need to. And I did take time at certain points. And when I did take those times, mighty God. But outside of that,
that's it.
Blinders.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In order, because I felt like I had to make it through.
Yeah, I think
It's one of those like push through seasons.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think it was important to highlight in the midst of that too. Is like while going through these experiences, it feels very open and vulnerable and sensitive, and so we get to a place where we need protection,
sensitive,
and the tunnel vision or the all gas. What did I say?
No brakes.
All gas,
no brakes, and the distancing. All of it in some capacity is there to protect us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now staying in those places are not going to be
healthy. No,
are not going to be healthy.
Doable.
Yeah, we need it for a moment. We can't keep running off of fuel that we don't have, and so it gives us a moment to kind of pause for a second and to be able to recalibrate in some form or fashion. But that just goes to also talk about our humanness and our experience. Like, we can't be fully present and do all of the things. And so a huge part of noticing that things were off is recognizing that our norm was not normal.
Yeah.
It was no longer, we were no longer in the fullness of ourselves. And our focus, our engagement, our motivations, everything just shifted and changed.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that happens when you're in the seasons that are being triggered.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if y'all felt this way, but I think as a therapist, I'm always thinking about like what I say to my clients, right? And what are the ways that I apply that to myself?
Yeah,
Because most of the time it don't be applied.
Right.
But I was thinking about it and I was like, okay, Daneille, like it is important as you're navigating this to navigate it responsibly, right? Like there are things that I know are unhealthy that it's just gonna have to be what it is right now. But trying to be responsible, I think in knowing that the valley that I'm in will not be forever. So when I come up out of this, I need to not handle things in a way that doesn't allow for me to be my healthiest self when I dive back into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so being careful of decisions, but also knowing like, this is it's almost like self-preservation mode.
Yeah.
Yes.
And at this point, the only thing that matters is that I be preserved and make it to the next thing. I just have to like keep going. Which is a multi-layered experience.
When you talked about this idea of like, what did you notice about yourself? I think I remembered sending you, Lisa, a text and saying like, yo, I feel like every time I wake up, I like just something, like I can't breathe. I think I told you, like both y'all, I feel like I just couldn't breathe, not recognizing like it was just like the anxiety of the situation and just like being in that constant go mode. I just was like, yo, what is this? And then it became me trying to figure out like, okay, how can I be healthy? How, like, I'm not healthy in this space right now. How can I be healthy? Like, what do I tell my clients? Like, what do I normally do? Like, what do I tell? Like,
I had to put myself in the chair.
No, I really did have to.
What are the tools in my own toolbox?
What are the
Seriously?
Yeah.
What are the tools? I ended up like looking up like assessments that we had in the clinic. I had to look up assessments and figure out like,
use the resources.
No, I did have to because I was like, bro, how bad is my mental health right now? And if it is as bad as it is, like, what are the steps I need to take to care for myself and be healthy? The routine that I normally have with like getting up at 5:30, working out, like I didn't do that. Like I just was like barely waking up, couldn't, like I wasn't there. And so health really, when I realized like my normal routine and my health just wasn't cutting it, I'm like, yo, I gotta do something different.
Yeah.
It also took sitting with myself too. Like,
Yeah.
I think I took too long, but I got there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Health is really a thing. I think I've said this to y'all before, but I have a running joke with a lot of friends of the fact that like I'm not naturally a crier. Like people just crying that out. It takes a lot for me to get there. But what will happen is that my body will cry for me, right? And my body crying is sickness. And when was it? It was, yes, okay. I realized that I was sick on Halloween, so October 31st. I was like, I got a little in my throat. Like, what's this?
Oh, God.
Y'all, I was sick for the next 5 weeks it was a cold, I think, that turned into a sinus infection that left me with laryngitis. And so for 5 weeks, I was battling this, not always the cold symptoms, but the laryngitis. I didn't have a voice for 3 weeks and still did therapy like it was nothing. Took no days off. But I remember as I was navigating, I was like, body, you were clearly tired. And I can't cry for myself, but at this point, You're giving me all the indicators that you're done. And the unfortunate thing is that I had to keep going because I carry these responsibilities. And transparently, because we usually talk about race things and those kinds of things in the spheres that we're in, I think there's a built-in thing into me, and that like you can't stop. Like there's nothing that you can put down. You can't stop because of the responsibilities you carry, because of who or what you represent. Like you need to show up at church, you need to show up at work, you need to show up at school, you need to like do all the things. And so body was screaming, health screaming, and me still going.
I remember like that feeling of like, I think again telling y'all like, yo, I have to keep going. And I remember calling my parents, and my daddy was like, do you need permission? Do you need permission? He was like, take the day off, like you have permission to just stop. And I mean, I think that's definitely cultural and racial, and just thinking that you have to be, you know, top tier, number one, going all the time. And I was like, yo, my other classmates taking breaks. Why am I not? I need to. Like, I genuinely needed to take a break. So yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, as we're talking about this, I'm also observing how, like, I think in what the both of you are describing in your processes was a element of like of going and trying to keep present a lot of the things that were going on. I was present, but like I said, my tendency is more so to become like more avoidant in the midst of it. So I'm listening to you guys and seeing how like there are also differences of navigating what it looks like to be maneuvering through these various seasons of life. And I think for me, it was last year at some point. And I think, like you said, I've forgotten some parts of it. I think somewhat because my brain is trying to forget.
It's real.
It really be doing that.
It really does.
Yeah, it's like a weird place where I'm trying to like not dwell on it. And so I'm somewhat forgetting. And I'm also wanting to allow myself to morph into something different. I recognize that, like, yes, things will be difficult in life, but I did not like the version of myself that was present in the midst of that. I was not pleased. And I recognized that I recognize that there will be imperfections in the midst of the process for me in terms of how I process, how I navigate, and how I show up. But I don't think that was the version of me that was good in relationship with myself. I don't think that was a version of me that was good in relationships and that was present in relationships. I don't think that was a version of me that was pursuing God. It's like all facets. I was unsatisfied with that. And so for me, I remember when in preparation for my birthday in August, I wanted for this year of my life to look different. And I was prayerfully considering what that needed to look like. And I knew a huge part of it. And I talked to the both of you about it, of this year of 2023 is going to look different for me. And I needed it to look different for me. And so that looked like changing a lot of the ways that I was praying and I was maneuvering through relationship with myself. Because one thing I could do is create an internal war within myself. Nobody got to do it for me. I'm going to do it for myself. And it will be chaos up in here, okay? And that will result in shutdown. And so I get overwhelmed by all of the emotions that exist in that and just shut down because I don't want to feel nothing. I just want to isolate. I don't want to talk to nobody about it. I don't want to be seen in it because it feels disgusting. And so I will retreat in protection of all of that. So anyhow, I say all that to say, like, I recognize, I think a lot of last summer for myself of how much I was unpleased and I wanted for things to look different. I didn't know how, but I told myself and I made a commitment to myself that things are going to look different. So I started investing in myself differently. I had to see myself as someone worth investing in. I had to see my life, to see this journey as something worth investing in. I'm here on purpose with purpose.
Yeah.
And with that understanding means that I need to intentionally protect and steward myself in the best ways that I possibly can. Where I'm kind of was going at first within the journey, though, was trying to figure out all of it on my own. And that's why I kept like starting, pulling back. And so,
I can't do it.
Right, I cannot do it. And so it was in the latter part of last year, I did a fast and it's just kind of talking to God. I was talking to one of my friends and she just asked me about my prayer life and all this stuff. And I was like, fam, I've been praying to God from a place of anxiety. I've been praying for him, praying to him as like this place of God, please, 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 please change this, and in the midst of all of it too, just struggling with a lot of hopelessness. And in the midst of that prayer and that fasting time for me, God was showing me how I needed to pray to him differently. I needed to know him differently. I needed to engage him differently, because I was praying to him and experience him not in the fullness and the truth of who he is. I was experiencing him or thinking about him in the midst of my chaotic emotions. And reframing my perspective of him was really the catalyst of everything else that of what my experience looks like now. I needed to be able to hope and to see something greater than me in order to sustain in the midst of the valley. I needed that vision. I needed that gleam of hope. And God became that for me. And simultaneously, but also was beginning to happen was like relationships and things of my life began to maneuver as well. My perspective began to maneuver as well, because one thing that I have a deep sense of responsibility for is that my life is not just living for me. My life has been built and designed in such a way, and I believe that God has done this in ways for all of us, where it's all connected. Yes. It's not just about me. And so as I'm caring for myself, one, I do need to create boundaries because I can't be all things to all people. Right. But I also need to be intentional about seeking God to help me so that I can show up well for the people that are connected to me. Yes. Because my well-being is also connected to them. So all of that became a part of like what my healing and stewarding process and reformation, I don't know what the word is, reformation looks like. Yeah. But it's hard work.
You mentioned this kind of reframe of God in the process, and it made me think about obviously in the spaces of our lives that we live in, we have to think about suffering, right? And so this valley was tough. I'm not calling this the height of suffering, but it's been a tough experience. And I remember sometime in, I don't know, late 2021, early 2022, I was hearing a lot of people talk about God in a way that I didn't necessarily like or agree with. And I was like, Daneille, what is happening inside of you that like is bucking against their perspective? They were having their own wrestling respectfully. It wasn't like God is evil, but it was just like them trying to figure out, God, how are you God? And my life looks like this. And I remember coming to this place of like praying and really trying to reconcile these two things because it's real for these people. And I realized that a lot of times we view God in light of our suffering as opposed to viewing our suffering in light of God, right? Yes. And I think what you're talking about is like the nature of God to not be changing is who God is, right? God is the thing that is the standard, and I'm seeing the suffering in light of who God is, as opposed to having a tendency of interacting with God and speaking to God as if the suffering is the standard and God is the thing that is changing in light of whatever the suffering thing is. And so in our suffering being the valley, really challenging even me myself of like, God, what are the things that I believe about you? And how do I know this to be true? Yeah. Right? A couple weeks ago, I was at the Glory Conference. I'm wearing the shirt. Come on. That legit wasn't planned, y'all. It was not planned. I was at the Glory Conference that is hosted by Jackie Hill Perry and Lifeway.
We love you, Jackie.
Yeah.
If you ever listen.
Phenomenal. But she was somebody asked about faith and how they keep faith and something like that. It was a Q&A. And she said something about like she can have faith because she's like, I'm convinced. She said, I'm convinced of God's nature. I'm convinced that he's good. I'm convinced that he's faithful. I'm convinced that all things will work together for the good who are loved by the Lord and called according to his purpose. I'm convinced. And so because I'm convinced, I'm able to like be sustained and stay steady in the midst of the things that are not as I would want them to, because I'm convinced. This process, and I think life in general, challenges our level of convincing. It like do you really know God to be the person who's refreshing you in the midst of the valley? Do you really know God to be your shepherd? Do you really know God to be your anchor? And I mean, thankfully, the answer is yeah, but the ways of getting to the answer is literally the stretching of the valley experience. It's quite a time.
I feel like that was just like A little mic drop.
Selah.
We
Selah.
gotta let it
Selah.
let it
Just
simmer
simmer.
for a little bit.
Yes.
No, you're talking good. You're talking good. And I think okay, let me speak it go back to this point. You're talking about suffering and the way that we view and we understand suffering. Understanding it the way that God sees it, not the way that we see it, is what I'm understanding you say, right?
Sure, but more so of like keeping God as the unchanging one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we question the nature of God because of our suffering.
Yes. Yeah.
God, how can you be good and my life be falling apart in this way?
Yes.
How can you be good and allowing all these family members to die? How can you be good and allowing my mental health to tank? Right? And so like, no, it's not a matter of questioning God's goodness. God is good, period. And so I'm able to view the suffering in light of who God is. Right? And so maybe that looks like God being present with me as my mental health is tanking. Maybe that looks like God aiming to be my shepherd in the midst of me being uncertain. As opposed to like, because I think the question, while valid, almost leans towards lowering the fullness of who God is because my suffering feels so powerful. And so my point, yes, to view the suffering in light of who God is, to your point, but also just to keep God as God.
This is reminding me of. I always forget this verse. It's blessed are
those who mourn for they will be comforted.
yes that
Matthew
is,
chapter 5, the Beatitudes.
Yes, that is bringing me back to this idea of like, God isn't telling you like He's going to take the suffering away. Like
I have the quote right here, ready to go.
like he's like,
Come on, want a quote? You better.
He's not saying He's going to take the suffering away, but He said He's going to be a comforter through the suffering. So it's the idea like God isn't changing,
Right.
but
Right.
he this is the things that He did promise.
Right. Yeah.
And this isn't directly there, but just to add on to that too, this is a quote that my boss, Dr. David Qualiana, has shared.
Full government.
Full name. Shout out. He has this quote and he says, God does not promise protection from. Sorry, let me start over. God does not promise protection through prevention of suffering. God promises provision in suffering through His presence. This is the source of peace.
That's good.
When he said this, I said,
That's
hold on.
good.
Pause the class. I gotta write this down verbatim.
Yeah.
Because, I think in light of this, it helps us to understand God and to understand the purpose of suffering differently, which I think also helps to shape our expectations and shape the way that we respond in the midst of suffering, in the midst of what the valley could look like. And I think for me, beginning to see, and we've been going through this book together, The Good and Beautiful God, that has, and this is a really good book suggestion in terms of understanding the characteristics of God and reframing a lot of the narratives of how we perceive God in culture and how scripture actually tells us who God is. But I think being intentional in that space for me, it has begun to reshape the way how I see God as Father. I see Him as my Father. And in the midst of that, I see Him in a more tender way. I see Him in a way that allows for me to feel safer to invite Him in the midst of what feels ugly, what feels hard, which feels difficult. He feels a lot more tangible and accessible to me. And that within itself is also been a huge catalyst in changing the way that I even do relationship with myself. Because it's now teaching me how to be more kinder, softer, tender, present with myself as I engage what it looks like to do that in my relationship with God. Right. And that's been a huge part of this process, this whole season for me, is learning and giving myself permission, giving God permission and access to me. Because He's been knocking at the door and knocking for a while, He's been trying to get my attention for a minute. I was just like, I ain't ready for you. I don't want to. Leave me alone. Respectfully.
Why are you talking to God?
Y'all.
Why are you talking to God so hard?
Leave me alone.
Y'all, I'm not gonna lie though.
Why are you talking to God so hard?
I know though, seriously. I be talking to God hard.
No shame.
I'm just being honest.
No judgment. But God, I'm sorry. I don't laugh.
Listen, girl, I had to repent. Girl, I was blaming God. I was like, it was a whole to do. I had to repent. Good.
Wow.
But anyway, I say all that to say, yeah, a lot of reformation has been happening in that way, and I think understanding God, especially in the light of the work that we do,
yes,
understanding and forming a concept, a theology of suffering is absolutely important.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
We sit in suffering all day.
Yeah.
Especially if you're working in trauma.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Like, this is not normal to be sitting in this all day. Like,
No.
we need.
How are you supposed to do this without God, bro?
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It legitimately, sometimes I sit in the room and I'm like, God, you really are the superpower. Like the, that sounds heretical. But what I mean is like, same Mike Todd from Transformation Church, Pastor Mike Todd has a phrase that he says that prayer is a secret sauce. And I realized in the valley and with my clients how much prayer really is the secret sauce. It really makes a difference. I remember there were points even in the lowest points of the valley where you talk about like, what did we notice? So I noticed some parts of me that weren't me. And then I knew it was really bad when I would get into the presence of God and feel like you gave me a drop of water in a desert. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, you know, when you just, for me, was pushing through for so long that I didn't realize how thirsty I was. And so when I got a drink, I was like, oh, right. But then life pushes you into this place of like, well, no more water for the next whatever time. But no, prayer, the presence of God have really been the gift. There's a guy, I think his name is Brother Lawrence, who wrote a book called Practicing the Presence of God. I haven't read it. I heard it's good. But even the phrase of practicing the presence of God, I think is what we have all learned to do in this season. In whatever places we find ourselves emotionally, finding ways to practice the presence of God in a way that does sustain us and does keep us, and is our, like, God really has been the pillar of my life in this season, in a whole new way. So yeah, I'm just super grateful. It's been a time. So, yeah.
There's been another thing for me too, is being intentional about gratitude. I haven't taken time yet to read this, but I've been hearing people talk more about like how much anxiety and gratitude can't exist in the same place.
Can or can't?
Cannot.
Okay.
Cannot.
And I have not read this yet, so I can't say that for sure. So, but I want to do some more research on what that actually looks like. But it's been important to think about gratitude for me, especially in light of feeling heightened anxiety and wanting to intentionally care for myself well, but remember to be present in the midst of what can feel overwhelming. I think that's been a huge part of what my care, or what I try to allow my care to look like in the midst of this process. But I've enjoyed this conversation with y'all today.
Yes, bro. We're diving a little deeper every time.
Yeah.
They're getting to see the real us and not just the people who they see on stages or in front of classrooms.
Humans going through the things.
Yeah. So when we say to y'all, we get it, we legitimately get it. We get it. So yeah, thank you guys for joining us for episode 2, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye.